Hi. All right. So here we are, and I saved an entire section to talk about trauma and coming into this conversation, or basically, as I'm filming this, it's a conversation with myself. Um, I thought a little bit about trauma, and so before we jump into reading this section, and it's specifically in the second hub, is I think it's worth mentioning why I don't use the term trauma in the book. I use terms interruptions and stressors. And the reason for this is really related to the fact that Parinoma method is inspired by my own experience with making sense of the parts of myself that were kind of unresolved, and that were that I the sense were holding me back, but I just didn't have purchase of them, so I didn't actually know how to address them. And in that, over the years, the thousands of people that have crossed my path in a professional, I don't know if you can hear, there's a helicopter above my house, so hopefully that's not drowning out the noise, or maybe you can't hear it at all. I don't know. But like the reason that I'm using the term interruptions and stressors is that I was just talking with somebody in a like very professional like kind of forum, and the thing I brought up was that these patterns of adaptations that we see in people are across the board. And I think the thing is like one of the things about Parinoma method is that we're not entering into this process of transformation at the place what I call like there's the biggest crack. We're not entering in through like the largest trauma, or through necessarily through an event that is like just absolutely impassable. The thing is, as far as the approach on Parinoma, is that, and this is kind of how I like to instruct it, is the notion of what is the big picture in terms of how you want your life to feel. Like, what do you want to have that you don't have right now? How do you want to feel? Like in a way that you don't feel right now. How powerful, like your power and your individuality, like how is that different than where you're at right now, like in terms of what you want, even belonging, who surrounds you, the types of relationships, and really like how conflicts and difficulties are managed within those relationships. How is that different in this like sort of what would traditionally be like the 5-10 year plan. It's like we're looking at this a little bit more like, okay, how do you want to feel, not in a cognitive sense of like I want to be the VP of making X number of dollars. I was saying, it's funny because in this discussion that I just had, I was mentioning, my nose is runny. I was mentioning how I was watching The Firm the other day, the Tom Cruise movie from the 90s. And in it, he, at the beginning, the first 10 minutes, he's in the top five of his Harvard law school class, and everybody wants him, right? You probably remember the scene. It's pretty iconic, or the series of scenes of all the top firms that are actually actively recruiting him and chasing him down because he's such a hotshot. And the thing in this So, and the thing is like the like stop in your tracks, oh my God, offer was $68,000 a year. So that was Tom Cruise, number one in his law school class. $68,000 a year. So why do I bring that up? Yes, people know how to use an inflation calculator on Google, but my point being is that if our goals are things like I want to be a VP, well, they've kind of like moved the markers, and now like a lot of people get VP titles, and now there's like they've created more C-level titles than there ever were before. And so they're like these markers get moved. So if we're living with our kind of goals and aspirations being these figures that are actually like representations of like kind of abstractions. Um, like the thing is we wind up chasing lives that ultimately don't lead to our fulfillment. So part of what we're doing is we're reconciling how do we want to feel? How do we want our life to be in a way that like really represents like this sense of being alive that we'd like to cultivate. So anyway, off course, I just went. So I'm going to get back on course here, and I'm going to talk about trauma. So, which is that part of the thing here is that the reason I'm using interruptions and stressors is that I think in many of the kind of like disciplines that discuss trauma, there's now like a notion that's like kind of like looking at it from a wider like aperture and not just really intense acute trauma, and we'll talk, and that gets addressed in this I think here. But I also did not want to co-opt a word that could make people immediately discount what we're talking about, which is like what a trauma does is it just kind of like interrupts life as we know it and changes its course one way or the other. And so the thing is, if we're the only instances of this that we're familiar with using that particular word trauma are like like extreme violence, like war, poverty, that to be able to do an exploration, self exploration with that concept, it might feel a bit like loaded and almost even disrespectful and inappropriate if we're like using the word trauma. So I'm using interruptions and stressors just to make it more accessible. And I do believe that the connotation of the word trauma is incredibly heavy. And and like my notion of this is to like enter into consciousness without sort of like activating a shutdown process of being like, yeah, I'm not traumatized. Because I certainly had that, where that was just not part of any kind of identity that I wanted to have as being like a traumatized person. And if, in discussions of trauma, I distance myself from them. So I think it's just an important notion that, it's like the circumstances and events of our life, if they have like excessive voltage or not enough, that we adapt in order to be able to shape ourselves and survive in the environment that we're in. And that's kind of a broader notion that certainly like includes trauma with a capital T, but also includes just a lot of other, kind of circumstances and factors that can be impacting our life. So let's start reading. Let's see where we get to here. So trauma. So we do not consciously decide to become rigid, block our memories, or even adopt the spacey responses of dissociation. But again, our body's deep, ancient technology is programmed to survive and to consistently seek to find a way, even if it reduces function and feeling. Most of us like to see ourselves as resilient and robust because we are. We are resilient. Resilience and strength are coded into our being. Wounds heal. We survive and carry on living despite tremendous loss and difficulty. We share the same responses to shock and surprise that many animals have: fight, flight, or freeze. We are wild, strong, and resilient, but also fragile and vulnerable. The human body has narrow and specific requirements for temperature, nutrients, oxygen, and hydration. Our bodies are relatively delicate while also resilient and committed to our survival. Sometimes, in the face of conditions, events, and circumstances that can be shocking and incredibly brutal. So, I'm going to repeat that. Our bodies are relatively delicate while also resilient and committed to our survival, sometimes in the face of conditions, events, and circumstances that can be shocking and incredibly brutal. Trauma is most commonly known as being the result of surviving acute and severe violence, but trauma is a complex phenomenon, one that can result from events and causes not commonly considered traumatic. Trauma is any disruption to the harmonious functioning of the body. If we get yelled at, honked at, or even jostled or shoved in a crowd, it's socially responsible and mature to turn the other cheek, shrug it off, or proceed as if nothing happened. But if the jet fuel of adrenaline and stress hormones are released into the body and don't get used in response to a threat, again, where do they go? If we feel but can't express surprise or shock or can't fight back, it doesn't make these feelings disappear. Instead, they become rigidity, stress, and even underlying unpredictable frustration and aggression. Our feelings and emotion, when suppressed, will rebel and show up in mysterious ways, such as misplaced anger and rudeness. Hurt people, hurt people. The fight, freeze, or flight responses are deeply coded reflexes for escaping and or surviving danger and distress. Levine describes the freeze response seen in nature as serving a last-ditch survival strategy to buy time. See Chapter 4. In the example he uses, an impala attacked by a cheetah may freeze, play dead. If the cheetah believes its prey is no longer mobile, it may lower its guard, giving the impala a potential chance to escape. This freeze response to shock is more common in so-called civilized society than our fight or than our fight or flight. Some folks express shame and feelings of regret for not responding in the moment when shocked by the actions of others. Anyone who has mentally replayed a past event and imagined a perfect response to an insult is familiar with this. However, the shock response, even in social situations, can take hold and not release for minutes, hours, weeks, months, or even years. Victims of violent trauma get shamed for not speaking up sooner. But the body-mind will hide overwhelming memories until it's physically and emotionally safe for them to come out and be processed. Peter Levine's revolutionary discovery of somatic therapy for healing trauma emphasizes a reduced role in the story of the initial event of a trauma. See page 4 or chapter 4. Although talk therapy can and does play a role for discharging a traumatic experience, Levine asserts that revisiting the stories alone can lead to re-traumatization, and how we remember the stories contain clues. The condensation of an entire event into a single image is characteristic of trauma. What most people don't know is that seemingly benign situations can be traumatic. Examples of this include simple early childhood experiences of discomfort in the cold, fear of the dark, or even life-saving medical procedures that involved being restrained. These situations represent disruptions to harmonious and spontaneous responses and movements and cause stress in the body, and their voltage can overwhelm a small body that's still learning an unfamiliar world. Oppositely, neglect, not getting enough stimulation over longer periods of time, can also produce trauma. Children can be brilliantly inventive at self-soothing with transition objects, see Chapter 4. Carrying a blanket or stuffed animal, sucking their thumbs, playing with their pets, seeking a screen, eating food, reading, or any other behaviors that simultaneously numb and gently stimulate. However, if a child cannot discharge or express its response to shock or neglect, the stress is stored in its body until it has an outlet for release. For many teens and adults, alcohol is used for self-soothing because it temporarily relaxes and lowers boundaries and increases capacity for emotional expression. Alcohol can lead to blowing off steam, but it doesn't expand this hub's capacity because it only opens us up to temporarily. Any received gains of emotional capacity contract the next day, perhaps with a hangover. Abuse on young bodies, especially sexual, invades boundaries before they're formed and overwhelms a body with high-powered voltage that blows out circuits and fries wiring. Trauma from this abuse is astonishingly more common than people like to believe, and it's the survivor's decision when and how to tell their stories and process the experience. All survivors deserve the care and support of a professional and loved ones. Ooh, okay. Yeah. So, I mean, trauma is, and this, I think in chapter 2, there's a bit about capital T and lowercase t with trauma. But I think, like, even in terms of like developing compassion for ourselves, a lot of this has to do with understanding that our reflexes were functionally shaped. They're functionally shaped to make the best of a situation. And whether this was in their earliest of their development, or if it was like a reconfiguration based off something that happens later on, the fact of the matter is that, we really, when we look at ourselves and our behaviors that don't make sense to us, like, the big ask here is to give yourself the benefit of the doubt and just pay attention to whether your nervous system is already, from previous events in a day, being like pushed to its outer limits. And also, if we're talking about a really specific area of ourselves that is going to have limited capacity to begin with. So, anyhow, so this is a good one. I mean, this topic, it deserves a lot of love, care, and attention. And also, I would further my point of not using the word trauma is that I am not a mental health professional. And that one of the most extraordinary things that I've found with Parinama Method is that a increasingly large number of people are telling me that they're initiating therapy because of the book, which might sound like it. Like, look, I get that that could be read a number of ways, where it's like, oh, great. You need therapy after reading the book, but actually I think one of the things is it really is like a point of opening. And for me, there was a big part about my own deservingness, I guess, or even attention to like my first hub physical needs, where I took it seriously to have medical checkups and care, where maybe I'd been a little bit like fast and loose about that, dental care, things like that. And it's about building a team, um, and and just the value of your life, value the quality of your life, and that as we restore, it's almost like as in the restoration process with TPM, as we're starting to give ourselves the benefit of the doubt and thaw, that it's like knowing that we need, like, that every person deserves a support structure that is like a team of people. Maybe it's a massage therapist, maybe it's a Reiki practitioner, maybe it's, I don't know, like tarot reader. I don't know, like it just a business coach, mentors, doctors, dentists, chiropractors, nail techs, whatever, the people that are surrounding you, that are lifting you up in little ways that you've enrolled consciously as acts of like nurture and self-care and self-development, that this is part of the restoration and reparation from trauma. And while I wouldn't, I've been pretty mindful a lot, like I did a lot of research and reading and contemplation in my own work around racism. And I don't speak to it because of I think it's extraordinarily important that we learn about the impacts of racism from people impacted by it. It's a human rights crisis. And so I refrain from educating And so there are plenty of people like Rachel Cargill, just, and like, honestly, it's like, it really is, an important part, especially when we get to the fourth hub, is, and even when we're getting into like cognitive biases the later chapters, is like doing this work where we're releasing some of these patterns that we hold that actually, like, they impact us, but they also impact other people. And that's also a freedom. And that's also an opening. And that's also creates a lot of room for connection. So it's a little scattered, but anyway, sending you a lot of love. Thank you for coming along for the ride so far. I'm going to be doing a lot of these in the coming days because I want to catch up, and then maybe slowing down a bit, because I think if I have to do 25 pages a day, that means I should read like every like day or two. And right now I'm probably gonna have to do about 2 a day. I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, these are here for you when you need them. They don't need to be, today, whatever is May 23rd, whenever it is that you're watching. I'm just happy you're here. And again, like liking, commenting, any interaction with us, it just means a lot to me. It's really encouraging to interact. And what else was I going to say? Any comments, I commit to answering. That's my commitment. So anyhow, thank you so much. And I can't wait till next time. All right. Bye.